and I
Yeah.
think we have folks joining us. Um, why don't we wait just a couple minutes to allow other people to join? But it's great to be here, and I don't know where here is because it's all virtual. So wherever it is, it feels good. Um, yeah. I'll just babble for a second. So my name's Paul Wapner, and I am actually calling from Jupiter, Florida, which is in the southern part of Florida on the East Coast. And I'm actually visiting my mom. And I'd put her on, but I think she'd be a little shy. So, but it's great that folks are joining us. This is the beginning of something I hope which will grow. And yeah, and I'll introduce our speakers in just a moment. There must be a Zoom protocol for how you sort of speak over empty time, but I'm unfamiliar with it. So this is what you're getting.
Paul, I have a question for you, and
Sure.
because I'm curious, but I'm also wondering maybe for other people, do you have more room in any of your workshops, the later workshops that you're holding this summer?
Absolutely. So the workshops are virtual,
Mhm.
and so well maybe I'll actually speak to that. Maybe I'll start. What time is it? Let me just double check. Oh, it's just 7:01. So, but we do have space, and it's a sliding scale. All the talks are free, and the workshops on a sliding scale, and we have room actually for you if you're listening. So we would love you to join us. I feel really honored to be able to offer the speaker series and the workshop with Llama. Llama, I know, has been a gift to so many of us. And this speaker series and much of what Llama is doing this summer is a fundraiser for Llama. As many of you know, Llama has been unable to offer in-person workshops this summer and last summer. And so this is an attempt to keep the teachings going and to keep the family and community going, and also to raise some funds if we can for the foundation. So, but thanks for that fabulous question. Any preliminaries on either of your parts before we begin? Okay. It's so crazy webinars because you can't, so the three of us can only see each other, and we can't see folks out there, but we feel you, and really glad that you're here. Actually, I'm going to start, and I, it's just terrific that people have tuned in. We have folks tuning in from the East Coast, from the Mountain States, and from the West Coast, and it's really fabulous to be here. I mentioned that I'm in Jupiter, Florida, and I just want to acknowledge that traditionally this land has not been the folks that are living here now, but it's the Jacob people who were here. I don't know what original means, but they were some of the key indigenous folks who lived in this area. And I just want to acknowledge that we're on that land. And I really appreciate the legacy that this land has gifted us to continue this work. This is the first talk in a series of talks that are part of a program on contemplative environmentalism. In past summers, we've been able to offer a workshop on the land on contemplative environmentalism. But as I mentioned, this year, we're unable to be on the land, so we're holding it virtually. But we've added three speakers series, a series of three talks, and this is the first one. And really the theme of all of these talks is just a recognition that environmental challenges, we're often told, are existential challenges. And that can mean a lot of things, but at a minimum, it means that the environmental conditions have an effect on the destiny of our planet and the destiny of our of our species, and that the what we're being challenged by these issues is really to rethink what it means to be human. And by that, what it means to be human builders and architects, human activists, and ordinary citizens and professors and teachers and all the rest. And so the speaker series is an attempt to kind of probe that existential dimension. And tonight we're going to be hearing about, the title is Architecture for a Finite Planet. And we're going to sort of start the conversation off with thinking about the built environment. But I want to remind you that a week from today, which is again Tuesday, July 6th, we're going to have a panel on contemplative environmentalism, and we'll have Malini Raghunathan as well as Lena Fletcher joining us, and that will be a conversation to explore the relationship between justice, environmental well-being, and the inner life. And then the week after that, which would be Tuesday, July 13th, we're going to have, it's called Environmental Activism in a World of Wounds. And we'll be having Bill McKibben and Lila June on that session. And those are the two follow-on speaker series from today. And I really encourage you to come, absolutely free. And finally, we'll finish this series with a weekend workshop on July 16th to the 18th, which will be myself and Lena Fletcher will lead that workshop. And it'll be 3 days of exploring the contemplative dimension of environmental challenges. So it's my incredible pleasure to introduce to you now George Marshall. George is a Llama resident. And he was up at Llama today, but the internet was a little funky, so he's come down to Taos. And George, it's so wonderful of you to lead this off, and welcome. And I'll just turn it over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'm George, and as Paul said, I'm a resident at the Lama Foundation. I've been living at Llama for about 3 years now. If you don't know what Llama is, it's a retreat center and intentional community in northern New Mexico. Historically, Llama is situated on the Kiowa Peace Trail, and to my understanding, the Tiwa, Pueblo, and Red Willow people have all had deep relationships to Llama in the past and in the present. Llama's mission statement is dedicated to the awakening of consciousness and openness to all spiritual and religious traditions. And we also have a deep relationship to the stewardship of the land. And that last piece is a big reason that we're working with Paul for this series these next few weeks. Our panelists today, Jade and soon Stephen, who will be joining us around 5:30. They have been building at Llama for about 10 years now, and we'll have a chance to see some of those beautiful structures in a little bit. Throughout those 10 years, they've demonstrated a deep relationship, care and consideration for the natural world. Our conversation today will revolve around mindfulness and architecture, and how we, all as individuals, can build creatively, adaptively, and communally as climate change continues to accelerate. Before I hand it over to Jade, I just want to say that if you have any questions at all during the talk today, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can enter all of your questions there. In the last half hour of our talk today, we will shift our focus to responding to those questions. So please stick with us, and you can feel free to enter your questions at any time during the call, and we'll get to them. Great. Thanks again, everybody, for joining, and welcome, Jade. Please feel free to introduce yourself. And yeah.
Great.
Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, George and Paul and Tracy, and to the Lama Foundation for asking me to do this. And I'm going to go through all of the buildings that we've actually built at Llama in the next 20, 30 minutes. But I want to give you a little background on myself first. And so I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you'll still be able to see me when I do this, and George as well. So George, you can still see?
Yep.
You see, okay, great. So yeah, so here we are, architecture for a finite planet. And I visited Llama this past weekend and sat down and talked to George, talked to Paul, and brainstormed a bunch of different things. And really, so I'm not going to be talking about specific architectural construction styles or kind of the technology behind sustainability, but maybe more the big picture of the way that I see architecture. So here is, let's see, here are Stephen and I, and we're a team. So we're married. We are both architects. We've been practicing together. We had a small firm for maybe 15 years or so. We both taught together. He's been my life partner and my work partner for the past 22 years or so. And I want to back up. So, and just acknowledge the land that I'm on. So I'm in Boulder. I teach at the University of Colorado. And Boulder, before it became Boulder, it was the land that was home to the Arapaho, the Ute, and the Cheyenne. I actually had a friend who sent me a list of 42 total tribes. So it wasn't just that, it was a very popular place for a number of Native Americans. No, but I'm broadcasting from Boulder. Originally, though, I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. Stephen is from upstate New York, kind of near Syracuse. And I think that growing up in New Orleans really kind of piqued my interest in architecture at a very young age. So people there's this love of historic buildings and a lot of creativity behind it. So if you haven't been to New Orleans or seen pictures recently of it, houses could be magenta and teal and canary yellow, lots of color in the city, lots of life, and really just a lot of creativity. So I think that was kind of my first interest in architecture and design. So I came up to University of Colorado as a student, and after receiving my master's degree, I came back to teaching at the University of Colorado. So I've been there for a number of years, and really we're the environmental design program. So we focus not just on architecture, but also urban planning, landscape design, product design as well, and really try to think about how all of these pieces start to make up a balanced environment. Between undergrad and grad school, I worked for a couple of years as an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer, and I worked at Habitat for Humanity. And that was really where I felt like I had a good understanding of how to design things, but I didn't necessarily know how things went together. And so I got this job doing just about everything from pouring foundations all the way to literally installing kitchen sinks, and became an expert at none of it, but really decided that I loved working with volunteers and loved teaching people how to construct things. It just is working with your hands is something that makes people happy. It's part of the human experience. So that experience kind of led me to want to teach design build classes and later. And I really do believe that there's this brain body connection, that the more that you make things and you construct, the more that you learn, that you really have to physically do things. So I worked at Habitat for Humanity. Stephen, between college and between his undergrad and graduate experience, he worked at a school called Yestermorrow Design Build School in Vermont, near Warren and Waitsfield, kind of in the Mad River Sugar Bush area. And so this was a design school that was founded in the late 70s, I believe. and to really teach people how to construct and how to make things. So together we had this background of design build and construction and architecture, which really led us to want to share that skill with younger people and with students and studying design. So, oops, that's jumped 2 slides ahead. So, so as George pointed out, we've been working with Llama Foundation really, I guess, officially since 2012. So really almost 10 years. But our first design build project was in 2013. And I've always called this partnership with Llama. And Llama is such a great place for us to have these types of classes because well, for a number of reasons, right? That we get to really sort of be on the land and experience being on the land. It's the distance from Boulder to Llama Foundation is about 300 miles. It takes us about 6 hours. So it's this, you know, it's really this, you travel there, but it's not so far that it feels completely foreign. So, and Llama is just an amazing place. They, as George said, their mission statement is about education. And so when we first started working with them, I said, these are students and we will make mistakes and things are not going to be perfect. And they said, that's okay. That's what Llama is about. It's about learning and figuring things out. And so that's always been something that's so good that they're not expecting perfection from any of our projects. So and here's just some images from over the years and the students and kind of the bonds that they make together and some of the things that we build. I probably have thousands of these that I had to actually sift through, but these are some of my favorite. So just kind of this quick map just to get you oriented. As I said, I'm from CU Boulder. Here's the state line between Colorado and New Mexico. And we typically travel, there's other ways to get here, but we can take I-25 through Colorado Springs and Pueblo and Walsenburg to Llama Foundation, which is right outside of Cuesta, New Mexico. So we're really only 30 miles south of the Colorado border, but it feels like a completely different place. And it's so wonderful that we can really get out of our element when we're building. All right, so as I put this together, I came up with 6 different lessons, and a lot of these will overlap with each other. But the first one for really thinking about sustainability and design is to build small, to ask yourself, you know, what is really needed in whatever it is that I'm building. And this doesn't necessarily need to be a residence, although I'm kind of thinking about maybe a residence, but it could be as simple as a shelf that you're building or a chair, right? How much do you need? And what's kind of the essential, like what can you strip it down to? And so this one, our first project that we built for Llama Foundation in 2013, we call the Buff Hut. And we just partnered with Llama. And I had a group of students in the springtime, and we traveled to Llama, we explored the land, and we said, what do you need? And they had a fire in the 90s and had rebuilt a number of buildings, but they said, we have some people that have been visiting Llama for decades, and it'd be really nice if they had a small place that they could come and stay when they come for retreats or they come to spend some time here. And so the Buff Hut, I think the square footage of this, it's smaller than 8 by 10. So the pictures, and I show you the interior pictures, it's really hard to get good interior pictures because it really is so small. But it's really all that you need for a cabin where someone would come and spend a few days, a single person, maybe 2 people. I just talked to somebody who said that 3 people were in there, but it's probably a little bit tight if you have 3 people. So and I do want to say that most of these pictures are not pictures that I took, but some student pictures and also a photographer from the university that would come down and just take the most phenomenal pictures. So we really appreciate having these great shots of our building. In addition to building small, all of the buildings that we built are off the grid. They're connected to solar panels. They don't have, well, besides the bathhouse, they don't have running water in them. So they're really just rooms for sleeping for the most part, and to hold your belongings in. So, so this is really all that we needed, was this very small building. And, but what we did is we really tried to put as much attention and love into this building as possible. So even though the footprint was small, we used these lenticular trusses to create some visual interest in the ceiling. You can see the students holding up the trusses and kind of celebrating the construction of this. You can see them on the right hand, the trusses in place on the right hand side of the building. And then just some of the features that, as we were designing this, we said, how can we make it as sustainable as possible? And so some of the things that we did, and a lot of this carries through from one project to the next, but I'll actually start with the foundation. So we used tires as footings for the foundation, just, you know, recycling those or repurposing those. We make sure we wanted to keep the buildings tight. So they were rodent proofed with metal undercarriage underneath them. Inside of the building, the flooring is bamboo. You can't see a picture of that here, but also some resalvaged ceramic tile. We used really simple materials for all of the furniture. A lot of it's just made out of plywood, so pretty inexpensive, but love kind of put into everything. So we used this reclaimed, this siding from Colorado pine beetle, salvaged wood. And you can see the students, as they were putting this together, they said, what can we do to create a piece of art in here? And so they designed this mandala that we laser cut in Boulder and then brought down to the site and made sure to assemble it correctly. So it was a little bit of a challenge to make sure that we would actually do that accurately and that it would all fit together perfectly, but then we were able to install it in here. We insulate the buildings as much as we can so that they're comfortable in both the summer and the winter time. We use high quality windows. Windows are usually the most expensive piece in all of our buildings because we really want something that that's going to have insulation in it, that's not going to expand and contract, and that'll last for a long time. So, and then we reuse some things. So this column that you can see in the model was a juniper branch from a tree that had fallen down. It was kind of nearby, and we said, oh, you know, it'd be really nice to actually have a piece of llama in the building. And so we took that branch, we sanded it, we sealed it, and then used it as the column for this deck. So we also found these amazing doors that we were able to salvage and refinish, and then just use really durable materials like a metal roof on the roof of the building. So so that's kind of our first project that we did in 2013. And this second lesson really probably should go first, but I felt like this fit better with this project right here. And the second lesson is to really know your site and where you're building. And so ideally, if you're building something somewhere, if you can spend a year living on the land or visiting the land so that you know where the weather patterns, where the microclimates are, the best views, where the solar orientation is, not only for just for windows, but also for really thinking about the interior spaces of your house so that you're not maybe getting bright morning light where you don't want that bright morning light, and you're really able to capitalize on the evening, kind of cool evenings. So really understanding the site that you're building on. And I felt like we did a pretty good job with that when we designed the Hiwa hut. And that's our second building that we did. This one had a bit of a Japanese, sort of Japanese inspiration, this idea of a wave, and pretty simple form. So it's just a rectangle with this shed roof. It had a very large deck. We wanted people to come out and and spend time looking down towards the valley in New Mexico. And so it has this really large window on the side that you can sort of enjoy the outdoors, even if you're inside. So you can see the window right here. Really kind of understanding the site. We built most of our buildings off of the ground, mostly for simplicity, but also to kind of keep animals away, to help protect the buildings. And then the interior of this, just some of the details that we put in here. We used, as I said, we continued to use mostly plywood for the furniture because it's pretty inexpensive, it's pretty durable, and you can do a lot with it. We made a plywood floor, and this is one of those things that we had made these tiles basically and laid them out in a series of different configurations, and then all the students come in and they start to vote on which configuration they like the most. And so we tried checkerboard patterns, and we tried kind of spirals, and we tried maybe half and half, and we really kind of loved just a simple kind of wave that goes through the floor to kind of capitalize on that idea of the wave as well. So the students, as they work on these projects, oftentimes they look at the project from the year before, and then they say, how can we do it better? What can we actually improve on? And so they decided they wanted to design some of the light fixtures in here as well. And so we actually used the double rafter to house some lights inside of here, and to kind of create more of maybe a mood light. And then we have the task light, or the pendant that's above, that is giving more of the direct light. So really trying to take the projects from start to finish, all the way from digging the holes for the foundation, getting all the materials, and then constructing even the furniture inside of the structures. This is probably one of the key message that I have for thinking about sustainability, is that things that are constructed that are both beautiful and essential will be valued, and they'll last a lot longer. So, and I think that we really did a fantastic job with that, and on all of our projects, really making sure that everything feels essential and feels like it's beautiful. But I think the students really took that to as kind of a mantra with the Sky Hut that we built in 2015. And this is named the Sky Hut because it has this large 4-foot by 4-foot skylight in the middle of the building. And again, just a simple one room structure. This one's a little bit smaller than the Hiwa Hut. The Hiwa Hut, I think, is something close to 125, 130 square feet. This one's probably more like 110. And so the Sky Hut, right? It's because of the skylight, but then the students kind of built off of that. And we needed to have some sort of shade for the daytime so the space wouldn't get too hot. And so they designed this covering that I don't know if this works. Someone that's an astronomer would have to actually tell me if it works correctly, but they looked up the constellations that are in the sky in the summertime in Cuesta, New Mexico. And so they etched those in so that if you're laying in bed and you're staring up at the cover, you could see the constellations. And then you move it up, you raise the material and look up, and maybe the constellations are right there. So again, I'm not an astronomer, so I can't promise that actually works correctly, but I think for the most part, it's accurate. So and this one really kind of this idea of art, and how can we bring art into the space. So we had kind of a simple glass door in this building, and we wanted to make sure it was private. So the students said, well, what if we etch the glass door, and what if we can create a piece of art on it? And so I had some students that were very creative. They created this image of the moon with these rays of light that are kind of radiating from it, a mountain scene, some trees, and then I don't have the image of it, but there's deer down below. So really trying to tie the sky and the land together. Again, kind of building light fixtures. So there's a light fixture that one of the students created And you probably can't see it very well on the computer, but they had etched in these cloud and kind of wave patterns that look like the heavens if you're staring up and looking at that. And then honoring the land that we're on and the location of Llama, we made these panels that would slide out from underneath the bed that you could store your luggage or books, whatever belongings you had with you. And so the students included the topography of the region. And there's a little symbol right where Llama is located. So you can kind of figure out where the different elevations are. So using as much modern technology that we have, things like our CNC machines and our laser cutters, and also marrying that with the age-old traditions of just building by hand. So it takes a lot of forethought to plan all that in Boulder and to bring the materials down. And more often than not, it always works out for us. So every once in a while, there's one or two little pieces that we have to find and track down and touse. But really kind of this idea of beauty and making sure that things are beautiful in the space. So a key one that's really important to our design build projects is to use local materials. So really honor what's around you. It'll actually tie your structures into the landscape a little bit better if you're using local materials. We also try to take things that maybe you can repurpose that have been taken out of existing structures and give them a second life, diverting them from the landfill, and repurposing things as well. So can things be refinished and just given a second life to them? So, using the local materials really starts to tie into the region, but it also lowers your carbon footprint. So making the structures that we build that much more sustainable. And we did a lot of this with this building. And this is our shower house. We built this in 2016. The students they really fabricated almost everything. So they first found this sink, and I think we got this for maybe $3. This amazing circular sink that we put in for a place to wash your hands before going in and taking a shower. And we actually, these slabs, we didn't cut these, but there's someone on the land who takes some of the old wood that had fallen from the fire and makes these slabs out of them. And I think we got maybe 5 or 6 of them. We were able to make the countertop for the sink. We also have benches inside of the showers that are made from these slabs. So coming directly from the land. And the students gathered a lot of branches and decided they wanted to make these doors that have this incredible texture and pattern to them. So they took these branches. Some of them are from Colorado. We didn't quite have enough that we collected from Llama, but we sliced them and then assembled them on this tray and kind of glued them on. So built the doors from scratch, actually made the tracks just from steel for these barn doors. And one of the things that I really love about the shower house, so we didn't want to have a lot of windows in here for privacy. So we have this fiberglass ceiling that we were able to use that really lets a lot of light in. We also used fiberglass panels. You can kind of see in this image right here. So these actually light up at night. It's really beautiful. It casts light down onto the ground, but we have these louvers so that you can have privacy, but it still lets light into the shower as you're bathing as well. No, used a lot of different types of wood, so to really create this natural but rich composition of a series of showers and just a simple indoor-outdoor structure. And one thing I wanted to show is just kind of this process that as the students are designing these, they're really thinking about the configuration of these spaces. So this student, her project, this was the kind of the project that we chose that would make the most sense. But we definitely had to modify some of the things. You can see this initial concept. You can see how we produced these drawings of what we wanted it to look like. We knew we wanted to have a lot of different louvers. We wanted light to get inside the space. And then this being the final image over here on the right, with the shower house at the Lama Foundation. So yeah, just kind of that process and how it evolves. It's a little bit different from one step to the next, but we can really still see the essence is inside of every piece. And then here's just some more details. So one thing I loved with the way that we did this is we wanted to expose all of the structure, which is challenging to do. Our students aren't woodworkers. I am not a contractor by trade, and so we're always kind of working on honing our skills, and usually we can cover up some of those mistakes, but everything had to be exposed. So we made these Doug fir columns that we sandwiched together. The rafters then fit inside of there, and then the beams and all of the structures start to tie everything together. So all of the hardware, the lag bolts, the hurricane clips, all of these things are exposed. Sorry, she will stop in a second. And we use these perma columns, which is basically a material that was used for pole barns years ago. Still manufactured today, and this actually elevated our building off the ground so that water, as people are taking showers, the water can go through this bioswale and into this little garden that we planted. I had a student that had a small forge, and so he used pieces of rebar and made hooks for locks for privacy and the doors. He also made these wooden handles as well, and that's wood from Llama as well. So as much as we can bring nature into our spaces, we try to do that, just to remind people that we're part of nature. Okay, my next lesson, and this is important, is to use as high quality materials as possible. So local, if you can, but really make sure that it's things that are durable, that ideally will have low maintenance. And an example here is we could easily put in vinyl windows, and it would probably be about half of the price, but those expand and contract. They break down much more quickly. They're not as well insulated. And so we really make a point of specifying. So it's not necessarily the best windows that are out there. They're not triple pane wood windows from Scandinavia, but the windows that are made locally that are still a high quality material. And when we built the elder cabin, that was our first year-round structure, and so it was really important to make sure that the building was going to be durable. And so we had a lot of challenging pieces with this, but I think it's one of the ones that we're most proud of. So it's a little bit bigger project than the other ones. This one's I can't remember the exact square footage, but probably somewhere around 200, maybe closer to 250. So it's a little bit bigger. If you can see, it's and I'm going to jump to this. It's not a square, which makes it harder to build. But the student that designed it was really genius. So she took this square and then she pivoted that. So we actually do have right angles up here that do simplify the structure. But then we had a lot of compound cuts that we had to make for building for the structure. So this building is made, it's a timber frame structure, which challenged us, but made something that was really beautiful. You can see some of the joinery that we have here. We pegged the whole thing together. So we didn't use nails in any of the frame work. And here you can see some of our joinery again down here as well. And then because there would be someone who's a little bit older living in this space, we didn't want to have too many stairs to get into the space. So it was a concrete slab that we poured. And we poured it all by hand, mixing all of the concrete, one probably more than one bag at a time, but maybe 2 or 3 bags at a time. So we were again able to find and kind of repurpose some materials. I had a student who had been photographing a timber frame building. And these are actually, they're huge. They're probably about 14 inches by maybe close to 20 inches. And they're these wooden slabs and maybe about 6 inches thick. And they were actually the tails from rafters of a much larger building that was being built. I think it was like a ski resort that was under construction. So they had this massive timber in here. And so they were just left over, right? Kind of the cutoffs from this. So we said, what can we do with it? And we decided to do probably the most, the least practical thing, which is to turn it into a screen, something that's kind of light and delicate. And so we used this plumbing pipe and these acrylic panels and stacked it up to create this screen that would divide the interiors, the entrance space to the bed. And then we actually ran wires through it so it lights up as well. So you can kind of see it lit up in the evening. So this building had a wood burning stove, as you can see over here, this little window seat, and we do all of it. The student, we had some students sew the cushions and sew the pillows for it. And actually make lights. This is a little bit hard to see, but this is a light fixture over here that's made from a branch that came from the site. And we have a couple of those in the building. So really kind of, just how can we kind of take materials and elevate them and celebrate them to become something that's beautiful, and also kind of spend our money on the things that are going to be, that we really want to last. So those high quality materials, the frame, the windows, the floor. Okay, and then my last one, I think this is probably the most important, is can we create community with design? So Stephen and I years ago lived in a co-housing community. We actually helped to, we were part of it in the early formation of it, and lived there for 4 or 5 years afterwards, and really believe in community. And so not just not just sort of as you're living, but even as you're building as well. And so I think that's something that we've been able to do with the Llama Foundation and with the students, is to really create this community in our projects. And so one thing we noticed after doing the elder cabin is we completed it. It was great, but the students didn't get a chance to really spend time living at Llama. And so we came back and we said, how about we do something a little bit simpler? We'll design 2 tent platforms for you. And the students can really integrate with Llama while they're here building. And so this year we did 2 projects. They're a little bit smaller in scope, and they definitely relate to each other. So the one on the left, we call the ribbon. So it's not just a wooden platform, but there's some elements of sunshade in here, of structure in general. So you would set up your tent inside of the space. There's these little hooks that you can tie your tent down with, but you feel somewhat protected and enclosed inside of this building. And again, the same level of detail that we took into the other projects, where we built shelves into the space. We have some branches that span the structure that you can actually hang things from. And then this door that slides, that so you can avoid that early morning sunlight if you don't want it, and if you do relish the kind of sun coming over the mountains, you can move it aside so that you can capture that. And then our second one was called the ribbon, and this is a series of 3 platforms. Theoretically, you could put tents on all 3 of these. This would be a pretty small tent, maybe a 1-person tent, a 2-person. And then this could actually hold probably up to an 8-person tent. So it's actually a lot bigger than it looks in this image. And the students created this kind of built-in hammock in the space. So this web of rope that ties together. And George was just telling me it's one of his favorite places to go in the springtime to sit and watch the trees as the leaves are coming. We built some storage into this, these crates that were actually built into the space. they can also be used as tables and seats if you need a place to sit. But really this idea of community. And so I have kind of images from over the years, but in constructing, the students are connected to each other. In staying on the land, they become sort of part of Llama, and they carry that with them for years and years. And then they get to meet the other people that are part of Llama and integrate with them as well. So here's Paul. I don't know. Here you are in this image. He was having a retreat at the same time that we were building. And so we had students and educators all get together in the dome and just talk about education and how can we be better teachers and how can they be better students. And we spent the evening just discussing the idea of advanced education. So this is from the very first year of our build, and this was not a posed shot. The students were all sore and achy, and one person started rubbing someone's shoulders, the next person started rubbing someone's shoulders, and finally they said, okay, come on, everybody, we're gonna make a circle, and we're gonna all sort of give each other massages and relief. So this is probably one of my favorite images of all time from building. And then this idea sort of community throughout our design project. So even when we come down to Llama in the wintertime, we feel very much embraced by the Llama residents. They talk to us about what they want, but it's an open dialogue. It's not just a client saying, this is what we expect, but how can we make something that's going to work, that you're excited to build and that we're excited to get. We have a lot of downtime well, not a lot, but we have some downtime. The students over the years have done a number of different things, playing soccer, hacky sack, volleyball, slack lines. So, just finding a way to connect with each other and some of that off hours when we're not building. We celebrate every single step of the way. So every time we finish something, we're like, oh my gosh, we finished digging the holes for this building. So I have this great video, I didn't put it in here, but the students basically playing whack-a-mole where they're popping in and out of the holes like little prairie dogs, kind of connecting Colorado to New Mexico. So, and then learning together and working together, and just enjoying all of these different processes. And this being kind of our final class picture at the end, so you can see exactly how big this camping structure was. And I haven't counted the people, but I think we're somewhere close to maybe 15 in the group. So, and we're all comfortably able to occupy the space and kind of bring our own interests together to create community. And then I have one more image that I just wanted to acknowledge, the reason that I'm doing this. And these are these are my daughters. They're much older now. They're actually 12 and 15, but here they are building alongside of us and being so patient while we're out here, and they've just enjoyed being on the land. So helping the students, kind of building our projects, and then always at least a source of entertainment. Yeah, so those are our projects. I hope that wasn't too long, George, but that's just kind of the lessons that I had, and then just an overview of what we've done. And Stephen's here now, so
yeah, welcome.
yeah.
Would it be possible to get both of you clear together in that on your camera?
How is this?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's got the computer up like 10 inches on the.
thank you for that slideshow. And for everybody that's just seeing these on camera, they're stunning in person too. And yeah, there's always the opportunity to stay in one of those cabins if ever somebody on the call today wants to come up to Llama. Yeah, I'd love to talk a bit more about your 6 points. We talked a bit on Saturday altogether. And one thing that I think we kept coming back to was the importance of knowing your site. And that's a piece that I think is pretty juicy for this call. is knowing your site and being there for a year, like what you said. It's also one of the essential tenets of permaculture, and that kind of deep relationship to one's site, and not just observing what a house will be like there, but just observing the natural process of what life does, what the environment does there. And in a conversation with Paul not too long ago, he mentioned, so often we think of building as something that you do on top of nature instead of with nature. Your use of local materials, and even just the branches at Llama, it shows you're building something that fits into wherever it's being constructed. Yeah, and I guess I have a question about, you've spent so much time building in New Mexico, and kind of how would you discuss like building other places and what materials people should look out for, and like how to better know different ecosystems? Yeah, I don't know if you've got something there to run with.
Do you want to start?
Sure, I can jump in. Yeah, I mean, it's as dumb as just figuring out what's available around you. I think, really going to the local lumber yard and saying, hey, what materials can I get that are produced locally? Is it stone? Is it some kind of wood? There could be local woods. If you're on the East Coast, there's hardwoods you can get that were harvested nearby. Even things like windows, can be, some of them are produced nearby. And, go to the old time, like in Taos, there's Randall's, right? You go down to Randall's, those guys know a lot. Talk to those guys, talk to the local lumberyard and say, hey, what's available? Yeah, you can search online, of course, but sometimes, talking to actual humans will give you a good clue. A local resource yard that might have recycled materials is another good place to start. Doing kind of a survey of old buildings in the area. How are they built 100, 150 years ago? Because they, by definition, were using local materials and, and that sort of stuff. So, I think that's key. I mean, there's one of the challenges in sustainable design right now is there's so much emphasis on energy and energy efficiency and technology. And that's sexy and cool and totally needed. But at the same time, sometimes it overlooks, the obvious things that are local materials. And, solar panels aren't being produced in everyone's backyard. They're made in China, or they're made in Germany, or wherever, India. And so, I would say start there.
That reminds me as well of something else that we talked about, going to Randall's or going to local places. Another thing that y'all mentioned was getting to know your community, getting to know the larger community. And so often the people that know best how to build in any specific climate, or they're the ones that have lived there the longest. Can you talk more about what community means to you, and what building for community and with community has meant?
Yeah, I'm gonna just tag onto some of the things, a couple things that Stephen said. But a long time ago, if you were in a dry area, you would build with mud, with earth, with and you would use that material. If you were in a heavily forested area, you would make structures out of timber. And maybe if you were in a wet climate, you would build off of the ground. So these lessons that we've learned over the years, just because we have an ability to import marble from Italy, or get exotic materials, doesn't mean that we necessarily should be doing that. That's the right thing to do. So I think but to answer the other question, George, really, I'd say ask a lot of questions, talk to people that are local to your area, and then also really spend a lot of time observing. So one thing I like to have my students do is do a lot of drawing and figure out details, because once you start to draw something, you kind of break it down into all the parts and pieces. And so if you can find something that you like, and not that you're mimicking it, but if you draw it, you start to understand how they were able to bring the water, from the roof down to the ground, and maybe collect it or maybe divert it, depending on if you're in a wet zone or a dry zone. Thinking about why they put windows on a certain face of the building, or why they shaded those windows with a deep porch. So I think that's important to and you can kind of ask the buildings those messages and kind of get the lessons from people that might not be here anymore, that they constructed them. So, but community, right? You kind of asked about that idea of community within your area. And I think we talked about this a little bit, how everybody, we all have different ways that we want to live, different ways that we want to be sustainable. But this understanding of kind of living together and sharing a space is really important. The more that you can maybe know your neighbors, know your area, I think is just a great lesson, and sort of in compassion for each other, but also even in resources. So I talked about this a little bit, where when we lived in a co-housing community, we were sharing a number of things together that everyone doesn't need some of these material possessions. So things like a lawnmower. We had 34 units in our community, and we had one lawnmower because that's all you need, right? Not everyone's mowing their yard every day, but even other things like, I talked about an example that I really love from Denmark, a community that would actually share a room. So they would build these townhouses together, and they would build a room in between the space that you could access from either side. And they would, wall it up, or open it up. And so if they had a child living there, they would maybe use that space. And then when the child went away and moved out, maybe the people next door would take that space over, because maybe they had an elderly parent that was living with them, or they had need for that. So, how can we, again, kind of compassion for each other, and finding ways to share the finite resources that we have.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, and I also, I know that we're already approaching 6 o'clock, but I've got one more question before we open it up. And yeah, hearing your thoughts on community, it reminds me of how, as climate change continues to accelerate, we're going to rely more and more on one another to hold space for us, and to kind of support each other. And I'm thinking back to in 1996, when the fire happened at Lama Foundation. There was a huge effort in the entire community and beyond the community to bring the land back to life. And some people develop new relationships with the mountain and continue to have deep relationships to this day, because of how community blossomed at that time. Yeah, and I'm wondering, as climate change accelerates, how do you make decisions, build like construction decisions? How do you think about building adaptively, and with the knowledge that a natural disaster can come along, and how do we withstand that, either on our own or in our community?
Yeah, can I answer that, or I can start to answer it?
Sure.
I think it's something that I personally really struggle with as an architect, because it's, on one hand, I want to build stuff that's going to be here for a long time, and withstand those challenges. On the other hand, I'm like, well, maybe we should just be building biodegradable temporary stuff, and And so it's, I definitely don't have an answer, a right answer. I think it's, comes down to specific site and building. I mean, one thing, we had traveled for a year, and at one point it occurred to me, wow, every building in Boulder in 300 or 400 years will not be here. Maybe there's one or two buildings, and we're trying to identify what those buildings would be, but every single other building in Boulder will be gone in certainly 500 years, if not 300 years. And just thinking about that sort of like shifted my thinking, like, oh my God. And so I don't know the answer, because you'll go to Europe and you say, well, geez, some of these buildings have been here for 1,000 years or 1,200 years because they're made out of stone, and they're built on top of layers of community and humanity. So I don't know. It's definitely an open-ended question. What's the right approach? Yeah.
I do think there's some basic things, though, that we should use most of the building codes as kind of the lowest bar for what we should actually be building. So, it's not like we're just going to put the minimum amount of insulation into a space, but how can we really insulate it so that we don't have to excessively heat and cool a space? Again, like the quality, if you make something small, in theory, you then have a little bit more money that you can spend on higher quality materials. So I think there's an idea of something that could just go back to the earth. And, there's probably some things that we don't want that you build with the idea that it's not supposed to last for a really long time. But I think for the most part, you probably want to do, overbuild and do as good of a job as possible.
Thank you. Since we're a bit past 6, I want to open it up to questions. And also, it appears that I said the fire happened in 1986, and it actually happened in 1996. So sorry for the confusion there. So the first question we have is from Tracy Cates, and she asked, how long does it take your classes to complete a project?
So we usually start.
Depends on when you start the clock.
We usually spend a spring semester designing, and we even go down to New Mexico, and usually like mid to late April, and do foundation work. So we probably, I'd say, start then, but then we let the concrete cure. So it needs some time to cure before we can actually build on it. In early May, we start making furniture and acquiring materials, but we're usually on site at Llama for about 3 weeks, and that has varied. But I don't think we've ever spent more than 21 days on site.
But, that's a really interesting question. In architecture, we get that all the time. It's like, oh, we're going to go get our permit and start building, and it'll be done in 6 months. And people don't realize, well, wait, there's a whole year before you even have that permit in your hand, especially depending on, the local municipality and how strict and what their requirements are. And so, a little bit like our project, it's really, you're really talking about 6 or 7 months is the right answer. Yeah, we might be out there for 3 weeks swinging the hammer, but the project took 6 or 7 months, and that's really how you got to think of it.
And I think it's something that's, what is it, the three-legged stool, where it's like, is the project done well? Is it sort of on budget? And then is it done on time? And I would really encourage anyone that's constructing something. It's hard to get all 3 of those goals met at the same time. And I would say the time piece really should probably be the least important. That we've often had clients who will say, but I really want to have Thanksgiving at my house, and my new house, and it's it makes sense, but I find kind of trusting the process and trying not to get into these deadlines is more important. That being said, I'm always feel responsible for students getting home on time. So we kind of work really hard so that I can ensure that I'm not taking up their whole summer.
Thank you. Our next question, it seems to be a two-parter or just a long one. It's from Diane Singerman, and it asks, can you talk a bit more about the lasting impact your design and build classes and building at Llama has had on your students? And how has this experience influenced your students' professional commitments to building sustainably and in community as their professional life develops? So there's a lot there.
So one thing that I'm really proud of is I believe every year we have had students from previous years come back for a weekend or so during the build and help out the next group. And I have to ask myself, did you ever go back to your calculus class and sit in after you took that course? Or and maybe you did, or or a Spanish class or something. So the students love Llama. That's not a result of me. It's really a result of Llama. They love coming back. We have a student that's going to come back and be a steward next week. And then what I've seen with each other, when they come back and they go to school, they're connected and they spend the next 2 or 3 years with each other. They feel that they can rely on each other to work together. They kind of create this teamwork. We've had some students get married. So again, I don't think that's a result of us, but I think that they are connected. And then in the practice, again, kind of back to like where I started, where I felt like I needed to know how things went together in order to design, that it shouldn't just look good, but it should actually make sense. The students will often carry those lessons of how to construct something into their lives, in their practice.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add on that. It's interesting. We, during those 6 or 7 years, we did some other projects that weren't at Llama, and we did one at a local school. And it was a really great little project, entry pavilion. And, the students weren't living together. They weren't sharing meals. They weren't pooping in an outhouse. They weren't doing any of that, right? They were, going back every day, living their regular lives. And what's interesting is that their camaraderie level was so much different. They built a great project, but they did not build lasting community, amongst themselves, which is, and they weren't any different. The students weren't, it wasn't like they were a different group or less engaged, none of that. It's just, they didn't have that experience. So, one of the things was like, with doing the Llama is that we sort of have the students kind of captive, and they're forced to, be together and deal with each other, being annoying or not sleeping or whatever it is. And so they learn from each other, just as I'm sure you guys do as residents at Llama. And that tends to have lasting, benefits.
Thank you. I'm going to keep moving along. We've got a few questions here, and we've only got about 20 minutes left. So our next question is from Spencer, and he asks, are there things about the land of Llama that you discovered only over an extended period of time?
That we have discovered or that we do? Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, one of the things that I think we don't know enough about because we're not living there is probably the hydrology. Like what's happening with water, how it moves across the site and whatnot. We kind of make, assumptions and go with it. But learning about that, learning about different natural things like bugs. Like, for instance, I'd never even seen a tick like in the West, for 20 years. And then, or at Llama, and then all of a sudden, one year we had like tons of ticks, and then they were back again the next year.
And in Colorado too.
And in Colorado,
Right.
they're suddenly here. We never had them. So that's something you would discover. Soils, are really important in construction. So learning how the soil changes across that site, is pretty unique, and something you would learn. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that because we've worked with a number of different people, that the community is always changing, and so they have different needs, and so it's not really about the land, but it's maybe what the community needs and what's important and what's kind of the focus. So when we first started building the buff hut, I think it was closer to the fire. And so they said, we just want something that's low maintenance, right? And so we built the buff hut, which we love, but it doesn't maybe tie in quite as much to just the aesthetic of New Mexico or living in the mountains that we tried to really create a little bit more of with the shower house or the camping structures. So I think what's important is always shifting, and really trying to kind of capture the spirit of what Llama needs is important.
I'm wondering, I have an idea that maybe a piece that Spencer was pointing to was, how has your relationship to the land at Llama also changed as individuals? And also, you pointed out that observing the land over time changes your own understanding of how to build there. So as you've spent, almost 9 years at Llama now, what's that trajectory been like for your personal lives, and what's that meant for each successive project?
You want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been such an amazing experience for us. I feel so blessed to be able to come to Llama and to be asked to build things here. I don't think I've ever built on a more beautiful site. And so it's really important that we preserve that, and we try not to dominate the site with our structures, but really kind of integrate them as much as possible. And then, I mean, definitely for our family. So again, the pictures of the kids that I ended with, I mean, we were there last weekend, and my daughter's talking about coming back for a retreat on her own. And I saw, when we were there, children who were born and kind of grew up at Llama that are now spending the summers there. And this realization that there's this thing that we're part of that is sort of growing into something else was just really meaningful for me. So that doesn't really have to do with architecture or sustainability, but just that connection is amazing.
I think for me, when I first started going to Llama, I felt kind of an arrogant sense that I could control the landscape. We can build this thing here, we can manipulate it how we want, or we could fix this or do that. But as I've more and more been there, the sort of raw power of the landscape is more prevalent, like just kind of how insignificant, we really are in that landscape. And that's not being defeatist, but at the same time, it's sort of like just an acceptance that, we're just sort of pitching a tent, in a sense, and it's going to get washed away and blown away and burned, and that's just the nature of it.
And hopefully before that happens, it actually gets sort of taken apart and reused in another configuration.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Thank you. There's a lot there, and I appreciate that perspective. I have another question from Karen. She asks, have you explored any indigenous practices in your building designs?
As far as Llama goes, we haven't. And that's probably because of expedience. You know, I think it's more, we've definitely taken students down to Taos Pueblo. We've looked at some of those systems. And then we weigh it against, geez, you know, we got to do this, build this thing in 3 weeks. And so haven't used some of those techniques. And mostly that's because a lot of those techniques are designed to be done over a long period of time, you know. Yeah. But
Yeah, we have, you know, one of the things, if you spend time at Llama, part of this kind of this idea of connecting is like in work, and oftentimes that includes repair and just kind of maintenance of structures. And so I have had students work, I think last year we were there, they helped to make an earth floor. So one of the residents was creating an earth floor for a space, and they had some of the materials already. They had also worked with some straw plaster as well. They spent a day or two doing that. So we do spend some time looking into that. But like Stephen said, oftentimes we do end up kind of falling back to something that's a little bit more forgiving, and also maybe something that's more traditional that students will be using in the future too.
Yeah, and hearing your comment about expedience, it also sounds like, given the nature of your program, it doesn't permit for maybe using those traditional practices. But yeah, I guess there's a question there that if time wasn't a constraint in your building process, would there be a change in your relationship to these Indigenous building practices?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's just such a beauty to that, and I think it is something that works so well in the Southwest to make, you know, Adobe Adobe buildings, Ramder, cob, all of these kind of natural materials. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Our next question is Adobe part of the consideration for sustainable buildings at Llama, and probably in this region of the Southwest in general?
I think it should be, for sure. You know, again, it gets back to the previous answer as far as our cabins went. But I think with something like Adobe, you really have to make a commitment to somebody living in that space and repairing it, and working on it continually.
Annually, not daily.
Yeah, not
So
daily, but annually, but even more. I mean,
seasonally.
things, yeah. I mean, if you get a big rainstorm and stuff, you got to repair it. And that's part of that, you know, living in that place. So Llama's kind of curious in that you do have some residents, but you guys can't manage the amount of maintenance that would be required. If everything was that material, it would be impossible for 12 or 15 people to do that. And so you have a lot of people coming in for 2 weeks, week, you know, so it's a little tricky. So it's, you know, again, it's that kind of dance between those two ideas.
I do think it's important, and this was something that we had talked about last weekend, that I'd come across this temple that has been built in Japan, built and rebuilt, I think for the past, I can't remember exactly how long, I want to say 500 years or so, and they take it apart every 20 years and rebuild it. And part of that is in order to pass down those building traditions. So basically, you know, you might learn how to do it when you're 25, 30 years old. And then when you're, I don't know if my math is correct, 45 or 50 years old, you then teach the next generation how to construct that. And I remember one year we were there, and one of the residents was very familiar with doing Adobe. And so some students, she said, come and help, and I'm going to teach you how to do the repair work on the sauna. And so spent some time actually doing some of the Adobe, the plastering the Adobe, repairing it.
Thank you. Yeah. it's definitely one of the skills that is definitely prominent in the area. And sometimes us Llama residents are lucky enough to have people come up and teach us, but so many of us come from far away and aren't used to that kind of material. But it is, it's important to pass on those traditions. So thank you. Paul actually has a question, but he couldn't use the Q&A because he's one of the panelists. And his question is, how do you live with the immensity of environmental challenges? And how does sustainable building enable you to respond to the immensity?
Well, that's a really interesting one. I was actually thinking about that very question sort of driving over here. And I think the only way to live with it is to accept your sort of insignificance ultimately, and have a sense of humor at the same time. I think one of the things that some years ago, I love telling this story, some right-wingers in Colorado had a fundraiser down in Colorado Springs, and it was Jim Beam and like one of the gun manufacturers were having a shootout. So you get drunk and you get to shoot your gun at the same time. And I remember thinking like, wow, you know, these conservatives really figured it out because they have a sense of humor about it. They're not making people feel bad about not supporting gun, whatever it is. They're just like, yeah, we're going to get drunk and shoot our guns. And in some ways, I think sustainability and environmental movements sort of went off track. And then we all feel terrible about ourselves. We all feel like we're not doing enough. The sky is falling. We're guilty. You know, geez, I just bought, you know, a 2x4. I should have used Adobe. And I think the way to sort of manage that and to move forward and to bring everybody in is to rekindle that sense of humor about this. Like, hey, you know, we're doing the best we can and we're all trying, and you know, we'll just keep moving it forward. But I think there's a danger in sort of succumbing to that kind of immensity word of the problem, you know, that if we just sort of like throw up our hands and be like, we're doomed, then we're doomed. But if we can kind of face it.
And I would say like, explore different things. I remember hearing a lecture of some local architects that were looking at the thermal properties of water and how, you know, water takes a long time to heat up. And so if you have sunlight shining on the water all day long, it'll kind of warm itself up. And then at night, it'll actually, you know, the heat will permeate into a space. And so they made these water columns, not structural, but these, you know, water columns that were kind of throughout the space. And maybe that's something that I love about our buildings and the way that Llama embraces us is we, like I said, we know that we're going to make mistakes and we're going to test things out. And I think that element of failure is where you learn a lot. So, you know, we do something, I think we'd cut all the pieces for the bed in the Hiwa hut and then realized that one of the pieces that we cut was about this much too short. And so we were actually able to put in a different color piece of wood, and it really became a detail rather than a mistake. So that's where we learn, that's where the students learn. So not being afraid that we haven't figured it all out. So I always begin the classes saying, I'm not a contractor and I don't do this every day. So I'm an educator. I'm going to bring you through this process, and there's new things for me to learn every time. And one of the things that's great with Stephen and I teaching together is they'll ask Stephen how to do something and he'll say, oh, this is how I would do it. And then I say, that's not how you do it. And then I come up with how we do it. And then we have a conversation, you know, the whole group, and we say, okay, well, how should we do it? What should we try? And so we have option A and option B, and then maybe a solution that we come together. It's a little bit of a hybrid of the two. I think accepting that imperfection is good.
Thank you. Yeah, that's not an easy question to answer, but thank you both. So we only have about 6 minutes left. I think we might have time for one or two more questions. The Llama community asked what's next, which I think we might be able to just talk with y'all about that another time. Diane asked, can you talk about the cost of these projects and the intersection of financial sustainability, community, and the relevance of your projects to other communities, particularly those with limited resources like Llama?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really big thing. You know, we used to get a lot of calls like, hey, I saw what you did on Llama. Can you do a tiny house for us? I have $5,000. And we'd be like, okay. Well, first of all, most of the Llama projects were anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000. That's just for materials. And there was a lot of sort of donations involved and different ways that was funded. That's not counting the labor. I mean, if we paid everybody minimum wage, I mean, some of these things could be, $100,000 huts, which sounds extraordinary. But it is. So I think one of the advantages that places like Llama have is that the energy and the labor, so finding building techniques that might be labor intensive, where the material side is a little cheaper.
Like straw bale.
Straw bale,
Kind of a
a lot of people were doing that because you could sort of do that. I think is key. I mean, the construction market right now and materials are just totally outrageous. And so, being creative around that is huge right now.
I mean, we spend, and so if we actually go back to this idea of how long these projects take, usually we're talking about them with the people at Llama for a year, maybe even 2 years prior to actually doing them. I start keeping my eyes out, keeping my ear to the ground of what's available. Oftentimes I'll bring something to the students and say, we have this, what can we do with it? So the brick that we used underneath the stove in the elder cabin, that was brick that was just not being used in our neighborhood. And was, we were able to get that donated. The same thing with the bamboo. We usually, a lot of times we'll call we're building small. Again, we can kind of call local places, and we have wood flooring companies, and we'll say, what do you have a little bit of? Because they might run out of, they finish a project and they're not using that type of material, and so they can give it to us at a better price. So we're very resourceful, and we are not shy at all about asking for a discount. So
Begging.
Yeah, I tell the students, they're future designers. They're going to specify materials. They're going to specify companies if they create relationships with some of these companies. So we ask everybody for, how they can work to make the price a little bit less. And so I think the Buff Hut, I want to say that maybe we built that one. That was probably the least expensive, and I think that one maybe cost about $8,000.
Mm-hmm.
The bigger it gets, the more expensive it is.
Sure.
All right, let's try to answer this last question before we close up today. Lena asks, have you had challenges with zoning codes or that sort of thing that not allowing sustainable housing / tiny houses that don't fit traditional codes and regulations?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a big one. I mean, at Llama, we've kind of skirted the zoning codes, not zoning, but we built them so that they would, if the building inspectors came in, we'd be like, okay, look, it's up to code. Yes, I mean, when you get into local zoning, you're probably in for a battle, because while they'll allow, a single family house to have a tiny house in the back, they're not going to allow 30 of them in the back of your house. And so, how do you negotiate that. That is really, you know, a local issue. It comes down to, you know, working with neighbors, you know, fighting that battle. The company I work with now, we do a lot of co-housing projects, and, you know, a lot of places, they don't understand or know what co-housing is. And so they get, you know, freaked out, or they,
Great.
afraid. And so there's, you know, sometimes you have to redefine it as just a condo project, right? And we just leave the whole co-housing part off the table when we're, you know, going in for building permits or something. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of movement towards tiny houses and things like that. So things might, you know, shift a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it also, I mean, like Stephen said, it really depends on where you are. I mean, he said you did a project in Trinidad years ago and had some sketches that were just on scraps of paper and walked in to talk to the department. And I would say that's always a good place to start. And especially if it's your project, again, kind of playing that card. This is a project that I want to do. Hey, help me out, because they can help you out. That's what they do every day. They're the experts at this. And you walked in and
Yeah.
they said, oh, great, we can give you a permit right now.
Yeah,
for
that
it."
was pretty wild,
So-
just with some trace paper. Yeah, I mean, you know, in terms of materials and, you know, unique building techniques, that's a lot easier to deal with, especially now with the internet, because you can find someone who's built it. And, you know, you could talk to a local official who's approved it somewhere and get them to look at that. But zoning gets into a whole different ballgame. That gets into all kinds of issues, you know, and that can be a challenge.
Thanks, Yael. So we're just over time. Thank you. It looks like we got almost all questions except for what's next. But I suppose that's a conversation between our community and yours. So before we close today, just my deepest gratitude to the both of you for joining us tonight. This has been fantastic. And we'll be putting this up on YouTube very soon, so everybody else can get a chance to listen. And I just want to remind everybody that we'll be doing a series of panels again the next 2 Tuesdays with Paul Wapner on activism, environmental activism, as well as environmental contemplation. And Llama Foundation will also be holding an additional retreat this Friday with Mirror by Star, Writing is Prayer. It's Friday and Saturday, so you can go to our website to check that out, lamatogether.org. Yeah, and thank you again, Jade and Stephen, both for being here. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for
you.
everybody for joining. That was fun.
Great. All right. So hopefully we'll be creating many new things together soon. Yeah, I'll be closing us up now.
Perfect. Have a nice evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.